Do you believe in God?
I believe there's some explanation for this universe, which you might call God.
You believe in Jesus? You believe in Prophet?
Well, I definitely don't believe in Jesus.
Okay, that's cool.
Do you?
Why not?
Why not?
I'm just curious.
I think the better question is why? Why would I? Because I'm not 10.
You know, there's great wisdom in the teachings of Jesus.
So it's like a 60-70% yes?
As Einstein would say, I believe in the God of Spinoza.
Everybody believes the earth is millions of years old. No, they don't. Most Americans believe the earth is less than 10,000 years old and God made it. Less than 15% are ever evolutionists or atheists in the test that they take, in the surveys. The majority of Americans do not believe the earth is millions of years old.
If Jesus is saving people, I mean, I wouldn't stand in his way. You know, like, I'll be sure. I'll be saved. Why not?
Can you tell me about your first ancestor and what kind of organism it was as it came to life through spontaneous generation?
You know, that you're going back again to where you know we can't answer that exact question.
Have you ever witnessed life coming from non-life?
Would we expect to, though, Matt? Is that something that we'd expect to see?
He said that because there are laws such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Do you agree with that statement? Yes or no, and why?
I'm not Stephen Hawking by any chance, any stretch of the imagination. He was a thinker. That's what he did all day long. He sat in a wheelchair and he thought about these things. Because it's an absolute statement. And I don't believe in absolute statements.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. Are you absolutely sure that you don't believe in absolute statements?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you really believe that it's logical and rational to believe that an explosion out of chaos produced order and planets in a perfect orbit?
Well, what do you call a perfect orbit? Can we take a 30-second break here so I can go get rid of my milk? Okay, thanks, guys. Hey, Matt, if you need to go pee, do it now.
All right, thanks, man. If Christianity were true, if the God of the Bible was the God that existed, would you accept it? Would you believe in him?
Well, what do you mean by believe?
Mark, listen, it just seems to me like you're certain that there's no certainties. And it seems like...
Absolutely there's no certainties. I said that at the beginning.
Mark, are you certain of that, though?
Absolutely. Absolutely there's no certainties.
So what do you think of that statement? Do you think that's a logical position that we could have been designed by a fourth grader?
Well, I think it's interesting that our honesty in the way that we view the natural world is always used against us.
Scientists are like cats. You can't hurt them. You can't get one to conform to another one. If there was evidence for a young Earth, you would make a lot of money because you would bust up the entire scientific endeavor. And anybody who is a scientist, Christian or not, is going to want to shake up the scientific world because money comes with that. And that's why academia has gone off the deep end so many times. It even happens in biblical studies and seminaries. The fight to be unique and come up with something new is what has destroyed academia.
How could Mount Everest be flooded? There's not enough water on the earth to flood Mount Everest. And you're absolutely right, because the Bible tells us that the mountains formed rapidly at the end of the flood. But then another question arises. Wouldn't that generate a lot of heat from this process of friction? And yes, it would. But this is fine. How else would 90% of all aquatic life die in a global flood? So yes, there was a lot of heat generated. But it's not a problem. The two most popular flood models of today both generate a lot of heat, but both from different processes. You see, catastrophic plate tectonics generates the heat from accelerated nuclear decay, and the hydroplate theory from the production of radioactive elements. These are both easily resolved by just removing two assumptions from each model. Walt Brown, who created the hydroplate theory, believed that God did not create radioactive elements before the flood. So all of the heat generated in his model came from the creation of super heavy elements which rapidly decayed into radioactive elements. Remove that assumption and you no longer have that problem of heat. In the catastrophic plate tectonics, they try to alter current radiochemical dating by saying that nuclear decay of those elements sped up during the flood. This creates massive amounts of heat, and there is simply no reason to invoke this. The radioactive elements were simply moved around and reshuffled with all of the other elements during the flood. They were neither created during this event, nor went through accelerated nuclear decay at this event. Now, the heat is only generated from friction, which heated the oceans, and much of this heat was put into the atmosphere itself.
Radiometric dating doesn't work. This is just a clear falsification. So if no known age rock has ever been dated accurately, how can we trust this radiometric dating process for rocks of unknown age? It doesn't make any sense because it's not true, because it's not a method that works. Now, the video also mentioned a lot of these things are very predictable. These are common arguments. That's why I have slides prepared, because you can pretty much predict what they're going to bring forth as evidence for a old Earth. But your video mentioned the crust of the Earth. During the flood and through rapid plate tectonics, we would expect as the ocean floor and the crust was breaking and the waters of the deep were springing forth, that certain of the crust of the Earth would actually get dragged down through a process known as subduction. You can see in the photo here, to make it simple, and it gets dragged down into the mantle. Well, we find huge slabs all across the world of cold rock that have been dragged into the mantle. Some go several hundred miles down into the mantle. Humongous slabs. Now, keep in mind, and here's a slab right here that you can see clearly, this blue line. This slab goes down 435 miles. I mean, that is incredible. And notice that this rock is still cold. NASA did scans and they found that it was cold rock. Remember, the mantle is warm. As you get closer to the core of the Earth, everything heats up. And so those rocks should have heated up by now. But the fact that they're still cold is great proof for Noah's flood and for catastrophic plate tectonics.
Take a look at this statement. A sudden exposure of the mantle to 70% of the Earth's surface would release enough heat energy to boil the oceans dry several times. This is comparable to the statement, your oven has enough energy to set your curtains on fire. You're not on fire, so you don't have an oven. For comparison, the Tsar bomber released more energy than all weapons and bombs and all wars combined, and nobody got killed. So two things are important. It's not only the amount of energy that is involved that matters, but also the heat transport. In other words, where is the heat? So heat transport then. How do we get heat from here to there? Basically, there are only three ways to do that: heat flow, conduction, and thermal radiation.
The ocean floor spreading, that rate, if you kind of look globally, you can extrapolate that out, and the Earth recycles its whole crust once every 200 million years based on the current expansion rate. So that's sort of the understood process by which you would sort of reset the Earth's crust. So what's the problem? Why can I not see a young Earth possible because of these facts? Cool, so if you're going to destroy crust, that means you're going to actually melt it. It takes about 1 million kilojoules of power to melt 1 kilogram of rock, and Earth has about, what is the mass of the Earth? So the mass of the Earth's crust is about 10 to the 23rd kilograms, so that would take 10 to the 29th joules, which is 10 to the 13th megatons of TNT, so 10 trillion megatons of TNT. That's not a problem if this is happening slowly, right? Just a little bit a year. But otherwise, you have to come up with a way to, one, generate that much heat in a very short period of time, something like maybe a year, right? And then two, what you would then be left with is the whole crust of the Earth being molten, right? And natural processes to remove the heat and allow that crust to solidify, that would take about 100 million years.
Can the rapid formation of core beds, oil and natural gas assist in removing much of the heat produced during the global flow? This is the old question about, the heat problem, the accelerated radioactive decay and whatever.
Yeah. You'll find that all chemical reactions either give off heat or they absorb heat, or the structures produce themselves will take up the heat and convert it either into pressure or they'll convert it into movement. So despite the claim that the world would have got too hot, this is in the ignorance, not the absence, but in the ignorance of other mechanisms that can convert heat into other things.
And we know from experiments, John, that had been done by the CSIRO on oil formation, and many others have done experiments on coal as well, that it takes roughly 350 to 400 degrees Celsius to actually create that oil.
We use coal and clay in pottery, and clay is used because it has one interesting property. As you cook it higher and higher, that soft white clay, all of a sudden it goes hard. And you can put it on the side and leave it, and it won't go back to being soft. So clay has an irreversible structure change as you raise the temperature.
Well, we can look at the dates on the coins, and we can find the coins have different dates on them, but actually the youngest coin would be the limiting factor. If there's one coin in there from 1750 and another coin from 1695, I can't say the boat sank in 1695 because I've got one in there that says 1750. So I would look at all the dates on the coins. The oldest coins won't matter. It only takes one young coin in there to change to the time when the ship sank. I mean, that's common sense 101. So if you look at a dinosaur bone, you should notice right away it doesn't talk and it doesn't have a date stamped on it. So how do we tell the age of the Earth? How do we tell the age of the bones? There's all kinds of different ways to measure this and scientific evidence to look at.
Okay, Pastor Harrison, well then how old is the Earth? I'm here to submit to you tonight that the Earth is, and like I said, this is within several years either way. Maybe it could be 10, 20, 30 years off, but it's right around this number. The Earth is 6,292 years old. 6,292 years old. That's what I'm going to prove to you. Now, on one end of the spectrum, we have the error that says it's millions of years old. It's billions of years old. Or some people, in order to just kind of compromise and kind of sound like they're open, they'll be like, well, it's like 7,000 or 8,000. You know what I mean? They'll just kind of stretch it or bend it a little bit. 7,000 or 8,000. But then you also have the Jews and the dispensationalists who they shave off a whole bunch of time and they make the number ridiculous. In order to do this math, we don't really care how long Adam lived until he died. All that really matters is how long he lived until his son was born, right? Because then we pick up with that son's life. So from Adam to Seth, it says it was 130 years. So he's 130 years old when he begets Seth. And then Seth is 105 years old when he begets Enos. Okay, Enos is 90 years old when he begets Cainan. Cainan's 70 when he begets Mahalalel. It gives us all these numbers, right? And when we add these numbers up, going down through Adam, Seth, Enos, Cainan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, if you add all that together and do the math, you realize that Noah was born 1,056 years after God created the earth. So 1,056 years. So look, so let's say we go right here and we write 536 BC is when that return took place, right? Then that would mean that when they went into captivity was 70 years earlier, so that'd be what? 606 BC, right? Because if they came out of captivity of 536 and they were there for 70 years, we add 70 years, we end up with 606 BC. Then that means the flood happened in precisely 2618 BC. Here's why that's interesting. Because of the fact that any history book that you read, any secular, non-Christian, that we only have historical records that start in 2500 BC. Every single one. The flood, they're willfully ignorant of the flood, which is a catastrophe that made dramatic changes to this earth. Extreme processes happening on the earth that lasted for a year. In fact, that virtually every culture in the world has a flood story. Interesting is you'll constantly see, geological books and maybe documentaries that show all these maps saying, oh, this is what North America used to look like. It's like 90% underwater. They will not have this man, the Lord Jesus Christ, to rule over them. What they believe is frankly absurd. Believing that the universe came from nothing is absurd. And believing that every single animal and plant, including also humans, all evolved from one common ancestor is absurd.
The fossil, you can see that it was suffocated, that the dinosaur had died in a suffocation position. It was gasping for air. It had suffocated to death. And it was buried under 50 feet of sediment. Let me ask you a question. What would cause a T-Rex, a fully grown T-Rex dinosaur, to be engulfed and encapsulated in 50 feet of mud? Clearly says that the mountains were completely covered. So if it was just a local flood, why would it say that the mountains were covered? That water would have rushed over those mountains. And so, obviously, mountains are great proof that the flood of Noah is a fact as well, because of what we find on them. And for example, on Earth, find fossilized clams in the closed position. Now, when a clam dies in nature, naturally it opens up, the muscle relaxes, and a scavenger will come and eat them. But the fact that we find closed clams on the top of Mount Everest means that they were buried and they were slammed shut by sediment and pushed up the mountain through catastrophic plate tectonic shifts. And so this is just powerful evidence that the flood of Noah is a fact. You have to ask, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world, so what would cause clams to be found in the closed position on the top of Mount Everest? The only explanation, once again, is the flood of Noah. There is no other option. A well-preserved whale has been discovered on a California mountain. That's the title of this article that I found, and it was nearly intact. Now, whales, when they die, naturally they float to the surface, and the scavengers will eat them. And typically they get beached. and crabs will go ahead and eat the carcasses, and they're made as fat. They're 35% fat, and so their carcass degrades so quickly. The only way that you're going to find a well-preserved whale on the top of a mountain is from Noah's flood.
Did you have thoughts about my issue with impact craters and why the Earth geologically is very different than the Moon? Because that's something that I tried to put forward my reasoning there, and I can't see a way to reconcile that observed fact with the young Earth.
Well, I agree. The Moon has lots of craters on it. Somebody counted them. That had to be a government project.
Oh, it was me, actually.
Okay, well, good. Well, I think if the Earth, I think my theory would be, and I couldn't prove this to anybody, but I just believe during the flood in the days of Noah, the Bible clearly teaches that before the flood came, that says there was water in the crust of the Earth. There are still huge pockets of really hot water under the crust of the Earth, or within the crust of the Earth. So my theory would be, during the flood in the days of Noah, the crust of the Earth cracked open, and we still have the cracks today called fault lines. The Earth's all busted up like an eggshell. The water came shooting out along those cracks and probably launched things into orbit. You could easily, with that much pressure, say 5 or 10 miles of rock on top of water, would reach escape velocity with some of the projectiles coming out. And so they probably made the craters on the Moon from stuff flying off the Earth. Maybe some of the asteroids and stuff flying around space today are still from stuff blasted off the Earth. It could have come from the Earth itself, the explosion of the fountains of the deep breaking open.
So, Dr. Rose, you were talking about the Big Bang Theory as if it's a proven fact, and you said it was a way to prove creation. Well, here's the thing. NASA said, and I quote, that although the Big Bang Theory is widely accepted, it will probably never be proved, consequently leaving a number of tough and unanswered questions. They only last up to 10,000 years. Creationists know they exist. Secularists know they exist. And so, obviously, they invented the Oort cloud, and there's no evidence that the Oort cloud exists. And the Oort cloud supposedly spirals new comets in, but we have no evidence for it. So the fact that there are short period comets in our universe, what do you do with that? The fact that they haven't deteriorated, and they deteriorate in less than 10,000 years, doesn't that limit the cosmological age of things, at least in our solar system, to 10,000 years? And just the fact that you find dinosaur blood, I mean, how do you justify blood and hemoglobin in the cells, which is active, surviving in deep time for over 65 million years? How do you justify that?
Once again, I'm not a scientist, but I'll refer to Fuzz-Rana, which the configuration of, some sort of polymers or something, also iron. This has all been answered. Even
iron in the blood, I've heard that a million times, but iron, nature doesn't automatically encapsulate dead organisms in iron. Nature scatters the DNA molecules.
How do you know?
How do you justify? Well, I mean, give an example of something that died in nature and then was submerged in iron. When things die naturally, they get dispersed, they get destroyed by creatures, by differentiating temperatures in the ground. You can't tell me that this stuff lasted in deep time when you have moist changes in the ground, temperature changes in the ground. Even if you were to put dinosaur soft tissue instead of an airtight jar, and that airtight jar and another airtight jar, and seal it up real good, deep time will always cause things to deteriorate. This is just very basic scientific knowledge. I think that you have to say something more than iron. Yes, in a lab, if you submerge blood in iron, it will preserve the blood cells, but nature doesn't do that. Nature scatters DNA molecules, and things deteriorate.
Well, we're both arguing. You're bringing up an issue that both of us know nothing about, because we're not scientists. We don't.
Well, I have all the papers. I know a lot about it because I have the papers of the scientists that actually made the discovery.
Okay, and which ones do you hold her conclusions that it actually is deep time that's real? She isn't become a young Earth creationist as a result of finding it. So apparently she disagrees with you.
Well, she was doing that just to keep her job. And she even said herself that these things should not have lasted in deep time and that they needed to come up. The evolutionists and the atheists, they forced her to come up with a mechanism to figure out how these things could last in deep time. That's why she was even fired from her job for making the discovery.
Hey guys, this is Matt Powell. So whenever dealing with an evolutionist, you're going to hear a lot of unsupported assertions and wild claims that aren't based in any reality. A lot of times they're based in fiction or fantasy or something that they saw off Star Trek and Star Wars. They don't base what they believe off of observable, testable data. And on the contrary, they will go running to time as a mechanism to support their unsupported assertions. And they'll say, if you give it enough time, anything could happen. And frankly, just about when I thought that I had seen it all in the debate realm, hearing about monkeys that surfed from Africa to South America 34 million years ago, and squids and octopuses coming from outer space, just about when I thought I had seen all of the craziest stuff there is that these people teach, then this happened.
But it takes longer than that, Ken. That's the problem. You won't allow us the time. You always tell us that the time is the religion. It's not enough time, Ken. We need more time.
Whenever these people go running to time as their savior, and they'll say, well, give it enough time and all these wonderful things will happen, what they're failing to realize is that things are actually deteriorating over time. Things are getting worse in our bodies. Things are getting worse in the world. The sun is getting smaller. The moon is getting further away from Earth. The Earth is slowing down as in its rotation. And things are getting worse in the universe. Things are deteriorating. So when an evolutionist cries out for more time and they ask you, please give me more time, what they're failing to understand is that over time, the universe is decaying. So the more time you have, the more the universe decays and the more things become worse in the world around us. And so time actually works for the creationist, not the evolutionist. The evolutionist will claim that time will work in their favor because they believe that things get better over time, yet science states that things actually deteriorate over time. What we observe is that everything deteriorates over time. One of the things that an evolutionist should keep in mind is that the Earth's magnetic field is actually decaying right now. And the Earth's magnetic field actually has a half-life of 1,400 years. Well, if you go back 10,000 years, the Earth's magnetic field would be too strong. It would kill everything on Earth. And so that proves that the Earth cannot be any older than 10,000 years old. And if you go forward in time, in an additional 2,000 years from now, the Earth's magnetic field, since it's becoming weaker and has a half-life of 1,400 years, will be gone in about 2,000 years. And so with the magnetic field decaying, if it goes away, we will actually die from the deadly radiation coming in from the sun. And so we live in a very narrow span of time. And this demonstrates that the Earth cannot be older than 10,000 years old. Because if that were the case, the magnetic field would kill everything on Earth because it would be too powerful for the living organisms on Earth to survive at that time. And so evolutionists can go running to time all they want, but it will never do them any good. In fact, it will do them the opposite. Time only disproves evolution and supports special creation. Time will never support evolutionary theory, as we all know that things do not get better in the universe, they only get worse. And so viruses increase in our bodies, diseases increase in our bodies through genetic entropy and through genetic processes and through mutations. So when an evolutionist goes crying to time, one of the things that they should always remember is that time will never work in their favor. Time will only make things worse for their theory. And so this goes to show that creationism is scientific and that the world was created perfectly. And what this demonstrates is that evolution is unscientific and simply a joke. And this is why, and I've always said, that it's impossible to defend evolution honestly. You have to lie. You have to make believe to believe in evolution. You ask an evolutionist, what is the meaning of life? And since they don't think there's any objective meaning to life, they'll say, well, my meaning of my life is whatever I make up. What they're admitting is that they're making up or make-believing a purpose for their lives. So evolutionists and atheists are the biggest make-believers out there. They don't believe in actual objective data. They don't believe in actual observable science or logic or reason. What they believe in is something that's completely opposite and completely contrary to the Word of God, to science, and to logic. They deny every scientific law known to man. That's what defines an atheist. Time is not a magic wand that makes the impossible possible. If something's impossible, it will always be impossible no matter how much time you apply to the impossibility.
The Bible says that the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now, evolutionists will say, stop right there. There's an error in your King James Bible right there. It says it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. We all know that it can't rain for 40 days, 40 nights. That's crazy. Folks, they think it rained for 2 billion years. You Google rain for millions of years, the first thing that pops up is that time that it rained for 2 billion years. Once again, it's the fallacy of false equivalence. When they don't have a position, they'll fling their own poo onto us.
Not read? Is that up on screen there, Steve? Jesus said, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? So there's Jesus claiming the creation of Adam and Eve was the beginning. Said it again in Mark 10:6. God gave them up to uncleanness. There are people who do not want to believe in God. They don't want to believe the Bible. The Bible dates clearly add up to about 6,000. To give us enough time. Time is their God. That's their pacifier.
The oldest known written languages are no older than 5,000 to 6,000 years, and even the civilizations don't go any farther back than 100,000 years. Now, if we've been here for millions of years, why isn't there an older civilization? You know, the response, and because we don't have any way that we can demonstrate that modern apes can develop communication and survive out in the wild on their own, and then they have children who learn to speak, never been demonstrated, so there's not even a good theory on how that could happen by evolution. But it appears to be created by an extraterrestrial being. The oldest known forms of agriculture go back only 10,000 years. But shouldn't there be logically an older language or form of agriculture?
The Bible says, speak to the earth and it shall teach thee. The earth is like a big magnet. Now, magnets always lose their strength. The earth's magnet has lost 10% of its strength in the last 150 years. That means, of course, it used to be stronger since it's getting weaker, and it cannot be more than 25,000 years old. Just the Earth's magnetic field decline limits it to less than 25,000 years, and that also means carbon dating can't work. Give you a few examples here. The lower leg of a mammoth dated 15,000 years old, but the skin was 21,000. One part of a mammoth is 29,000 years old. Another part's 44,000. You talk about a slow birth. Cover more on carbon dating on video number 7 and all the serious problems with that. But the textbooks will say, well, yes, the magnetic field's getting weaker, but that's because it's reversing, okay? It's a pattern of reversals. No, there are no magnetic reversals in the magnetic field at the bottom of the ocean. We cover that on video 6. This is all part of another theory called Pangea. How many have ever heard of Pangea before? That all the continents used to fit together. Well, I bet they didn't tell you they shrank Africa nearly 40% to make them fit, did they? Did they tell you they took out all of Mexico and Central America? Señor, ¿qué pasa? ¿Dónde está Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala? And they don't tell you what I think ought to be obvious to a kindergartner. Did you know, if you take the water out of the oceans, you will notice there is dirt underneath. People say, Hovind, do you think the continents were ever connected? I say, well, what do you mean they're still connected? I mean, like right now, you know, it's just the low places are full of water, that's all. What do you mean, were they connected? Hello, they're still connected. What a dumb theory. We cover more on that on video number 6 about Pangea, what's called the Hovind theory. But the Earth is spinning about 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, but the Earth is slowing down. The Earth actually slows down about 1,000th of a second every day. The Earth slows down. Astronomy magazine ran an article in 1992. They said Earth's rotation is slowing down. June will be 1 second longer than normal. We will have a leap second. Leap second. Yep. They have to have a leap second about every year to year and a half. because the Earth is slowing down. Now, kids, this is going to be complicated, so listen carefully. The Earth is spinning, but it is slowing down. So that means that it used to be going faster. How many can figure this out with no help at all? 4, 5, 6, 9. Well, if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, this is not a problem. I mean, it was going a little faster. Adam wouldn't notice. He didn't have a watch anyway, as far as we know. But some of these guys would like me to believe the Earth is billions of years old. Man, if you go back billions of years, you're going to have a problem. The Earth would be spinning pretty quick. Get up, go to bed, get up, go to bed, get up, go to bed. You'd never get nothing done. Centrifugal force would have been enormous. Man, the winds would have been 5,000 miles an hour from the Coriolis effect. And you want me to believe the dinosaurs lived millions of years ago? I know what happened to them. They got blown off. No, they did not live millions of years ago. The Sahara Desert has what's called a prevailing wind pattern. The wind almost always blows the same way. This creates a serious problem. The hot air comes off the desert, kills the trees next door, and that area becomes desert. The process is called desertification. You can read about it in an earth science book. Sahara Desert has been studied very carefully. They did a long study on this and said, you know what, folks, the Sahara Desert is probably about 4,000 years old. That's when it started growing. Egypt used to be fertile land all over the place. Okay, well then I have a question. If the Earth is millions of years old, why don't we have a bigger desert someplace? Why would the biggest desert on the planet be less than 4,000 years old? Well, I have a theory about that. Now here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. Now, it's pretty hard to have a desert under a flood. You got to admit that would be tough, okay? So the desert couldn't start growing until the flood water went down. So I predict, based on the Bible, the biggest desert in the world will be less than 4,400 years old. It is. Wow, maybe the Bible's right. You know, when they drill into the ground, sometimes they hit oil. The oil's under incredible pressure in some places, up to 20,000 pounds per square inch. It'll come squirting up out of the ground like a big zip. 20,000 psi. Well, the guys who study the rocks on top of the oil say, you know, it just can't handle that pressure for more than about 10,000 years. I know the weight of rock supplies pressure, but the pressure in the well is greater than the weight of overburden. They say it should have cracked the rock and leaked off in less than 10,000 years. Okay. Well, then now I've got two questions. Where did the oil come from? And why is it still under pressure? Well, most scientists agree that oil comes from organisms that are squished. They're changed by heat and pressure into oil. They learned in 1971 how to make oil in 20 minutes in the laboratory. In Australia, they've got a treatment plant that takes sewage sludge and turns it into oil in 30 minutes. There's a factory in Turkey that just opened up, a factory in Texas that takes turkey guts and pressurizes them and heats them and turns them into oil. They said in the article, we duplicated what Mother Nature does, but what Mother Nature took millions of years to do, we do in about 30 minutes. Sinclair has the dinosaur as their logo. They say dinosaurs turn to oil. Yes, boys and girls, they mellowed for 80 million years. I don't think so. I have a theory about the oil. Here's my theory, okay? I believe about 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. Okay? In that flood, lots of critters and people drowned. They got buried by the gravel and the rocks and the mud and the sand, and it got pretty heavy after a while, and it squished them into oil. So the oil is down there today from the people and animals that drowned in that flood. Which means if you stop and think about that, you drove over here tonight on some of your ancestors. Well, Noah's uncles anyway. Next time you're at the gas station, pumping them in there, you can say, bye, Grandpa. You should have listened to Noah. He told you it's going to rain.
The biblical age of the earth. The idea of the earth being billions of years old is a relatively new idea. This idea has only become popular within the last 200 years or so. knowing that millions of years are not in the Bible, they had to find some way to add it to the Bible. They began to take man's word as truth instead of taking God's word as truth. They began adding to the Bible with ideas such as the gap theory, the day age theory, and theistic evolution. In 1795, a book was published entitled Theory of the Earth by James Hutton. This book made people doubt that the Earth was 6,000 years old. Thomas Chalmers invented the gap theory in 1814, and Christians began to accept this millions of years idea. Either God's word is truth, or man's word is truth. The Bible is the only perfect speech in the past.
Well, as a pastor, I believe that the number one thing you can do to get people to question evolution is to get them saved. That's my personal opinion. Growing up as a child, I was taught evolution in school, and I didn't really fully believe it. I believed maybe some of the things that they said, but I never really believed that we came from primates or anything like that. And Pangea seemed like a weird doctrine to me also. But the Bible also says in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, it says, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse." So God does give light to every single person on the face of the planet, and the things that he made are a proof that there's a maker. It's basic, really common sense. Like, nobody would walk up to a painting and say, "Well, that's a great painting. You know, I'm really surprised that it made itself out of nothing." I mean, common sense tells you that buildings that were made have builders. You don't look like the Great Pyramid in Egypt and think, "Wow, I can't believe a giant explosion made all those bricks fall together in such a perfect building." And so also complex life. I mean, life is so complex, and to think that some big explosion billions of years ago is what produced life and intelligent life on this planet, and all the animals and plant life and the ecosystem that the earth has is just folly. It's foolishness. It's ridiculous. So I don't think it's really hard once someone gets saved, though, to understand the truth about God making us, because it's common sense, and it's also biblical sense. Well, 1 Timothy 6:20-21 says, "O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called." So the Bible, even 2,000 years ago, warned us about these oppositions of science, falsely so called, that there would be false science. I mean, there's people teaching that, you know, we can explore strange new worlds like Star Trek, and they basically believe a science fiction based science. And you know, even just the things that they teach in evolution are falsely so-called science. It says in verse 21, "Which some professing have erred concerning the faith. Grace be with thee, amen." So these false science, these false scientists and the things that they perpetuate, you know, can cause Christians to stumble because they're teaching them as facts. We live in a time where, you know, science is being called truth that's not actually real science. And that is the main problem with evolution, the Big Bang. And, you know, they just have no evidence to back it up. You know, dogs are still producing dogs, cats are still producing cats. And, you know, obviously there's variations within kinds, but you'll never find an intermediate fossil because they just don't exist, because it's just not true. You know, God flooded the world 4,400 years ago and killed every single living thing on the planet. And the only thing that survived was 2 of each kind of animal on Noah's Ark. And his family got off that boat and they repopulated the world. And the animals that were on that ark repopulated the face of the earth. And that's where you see different kinds of animals. God specifically said that he made things to bring forth after their own kind and after their own sort. because there's different, cats don't produce dogs. But that's what science, modern day, falsely so-called, wants us to believe, that, a plant made a human, or a plant transformed from, basically they believe that it rained on the earth for billions of years on the rocks, and they believe a primordial soup and two things that could procreate came out and have made all the different living species that we have on the face of the planet. I mean, it's a fairy tale. And to say that everything that came from a rock, that rain came upon it, is just, they want to talk about Christianity being a fairy tale and being a phony story, but look at what they believe. You have to have a lot more faith to be an atheist than you do to have to be a Christian. I don't like God. I hate God. God is Richard Dawkins saying that he's a masochistic and genocidal and all this other stuff. Those people are going to be judged by the things that they say with their mouth. They're going to be asking for mercy after the fact, but it's going to be too late for them. Too late, reprobate.